When we were expecting our first son, Samuel, we were blessed with many wonderful gifts from friends, family, and the extended family in our congregation, the one I served. We were particularly overwhelmed by the number of wonderful children's books that were given to us, each one with a story about how that book had been meaningful and significant to the giver as a child or a parent or a grandparent. I particularly remember a set of books we received from Martha Rossolo, who is a distinguished Christian educator in our denomination, whose long career centered on teaching children the faith. Martha gave us a wonderful set of read-aloud Bible stories that we have used often and that all 4 members of our family have come to love. In volume 4 of these read-aloud Bible stories, we find this story, the story of David and the biggest man. David took care of his daddy's sheep. Sometimes lions came to hurt the sheep, so David would take his sling and throw stones at the lions. One day a lion took away a sheep, and David ran after the lion. God helped David and brought the sheep home. One day a bear took away a sheep. David ran after the bear. God helped David and brought the sheep home. One day the Philistines came to fight the king's men. The biggest Philistine was a man named Goliath. Goliath wanted to hurt the king's men. Goliath said, "Send somebody over here to fight me." Now the king was afraid, and the king's men were afraid. Nobody said, "I'll go fight Goliath." And then David thought about the lion. God helped me save the sheep. Then David thought about the bear. God helped me save the sheep. David thought about Goliath. Would God help David save the king's men? Yes, he would. So David was not afraid. He said to the king, "I will fight this big man. God will help me." Goliath saw David coming, and Goliath thought, "This is just a boy. He can't fight me." But David said, "Goliath, you think you are strong, but God is stronger. God will help me." And God did. Round, round, round went David's sling. Zip went David's stone. Down, down went Goliath, and all the Philistines ran away. And David went to see the king. This too is the word of the Lord. The story of David's life is perhaps the most extensive narrative in the Bible, far too long to fit into one sermon. David is remembered as Israel's greatest king, a savvy politician, a brilliant military strategist. David was brave and inspiring and attractive. He was vain, overconfident, and too proud. He was deeply human in both his virtues and his vices. And like many of God's chosen leaders throughout the pages of Scripture, David started out as a nobody. He was chosen to be Israel's king by God through the prophet Samuel, but he was not even the prophet's first, second, or third choice. No, Samuel's instinct was to choose the biggest candidate, the strongest candidate, the one most likely to lead God's people in battle. God redirects the prophet with this memorable command: do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, for the Lord does not see as mortals see. You look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. And so, against his better human inclination, Samuel anoints young David to be king. That's a role that he will live into further into the story. But Israel is in serious trouble right now. In chapter 17, they are engaged in an ongoing, never-ending war with the neighboring Philistines, and it's not going very well. The two armies are eyeing each other from hilltop encampments across the Elah Valley. The story is filled with the kind of dynamic tension, nonstop action, and yes, more than a little violence. So you might wonder, why do we teach this story to children? Why do they love it so much? It's a question I've been contemplating this week. I think it has something to do with the world in which children live. A world where the big, powerful giants are very real, always present. I think children relate to the truth of this story because they can put themselves squarely in David's shoes. David is a boy, a child. His older brothers are in the army, and David's job is to bring them lunch every day. One day, a single soldier appears from the Philistine camp. He's big, the biggest man. By some estimates, over 9 feet tall. He wears heavy armor. He has a spear in one hand and a powerful sword in the other. His name is Goliath. And at the very sight of him, King Saul and his whole army are overwhelmed, incapacitated by fear. Goliath issues a brazen challenge. Choose a man and let him come down to me, Goliath shouts, standing in the middle of the valley. If he is able to defeat me, then you win. We will be your servants. But if I prevail against him, then you will be our servants. So imagine this scene that for 40 days Goliath stomps across the valley shouting challenges and insults. For 40 days the soldiers of Israel quake in fear, wringing their hands, talking among themselves about how terrible and hopeless this all is. You can imagine how with each passing day their fears are amplified. With every glance across the valley, Goliath keeps growing in their minds. Well, the lunch delivery boy can hear and see what's going on day after day, and he's distressed by the response of God's people. So David volunteers, I'll go fight him. His brothers mock him. The king dismisses him. You are just a boy. They're right, of course. But David persists. What he offers is ludicrous, irrational, fearless faith. Faith that God will protect him as God protected him against bears and lions when he was watching his father's sheep in the wilderness. Faith is all David brings into the battle with the giant. It's a ridiculous idea, but King Saul is out of options, and what's the sacrifice of one small boy? After all, no one is stepping up, so he agrees to let David give it a try. At first, Saul insists that David wear his own armor, but it's too big and too heavy. When David puts it on, he can't even walk, let alone fight. The picture is laughable. Down into the valley David goes with only his trusty slingshot and 5 smooth stones and his confidence in God's protection. Of course, we know the rest of the story. The fight is over before it even gets started. David keeps his distance, moves quickly, runs, slings, stone flies, Goliath falls, the Philistines flee. It's such a wonderful story, such a reassuring story. We teach it to our children because we want to encourage them to trust God and not be afraid. But it's also a story that we tend to abandon after childhood. It's so dramatic, so vivid, so iconic that it can become cartoonish. Does the story of David's defeat of Goliath have anything to teach those of us with a few more years behind us? I think it does. In fact, I think this ancient story is true in the deepest sense of that word. I think the story contains the truth about the nature of reality and the nature of God. I think the story tells a truth retold and reenacted in countless astounding ways throughout human history. When we first moved to Indianapolis, one of our first family outings was, of course, to the Indianapolis Children's Museum. All 4 of us were blown away by the size, the creative and interactive exhibits, the sights and sounds of happy kids in every direction. In time, we have made our way throughout the museum. I will remember forever one morning Samuel and I spent an hour in a permanent exhibit called The Power of Children, Making a Difference. It was last summer, and Sam was about to start kindergarten, and that day he wanted to learn about another 6-year-old. In the exhibit, Ruby Bridges remembers the day she walked alone, 6 years old, into an all-white school in New Orleans. In her own words, Ruby Bridges testifies, the morning of November 14th, 1960, federal marshals drove my mother and me 5 blocks to William Frantz Elementary School. One of the marshals explained that when we arrived at the school, 2 other marshals would walk in front of us and 2 would walk behind us. And it reminded me of what my mother had taught us about God, that He is surrounding us, always there to protect us. Ruby Nell, she said as we pulled up to my new school, "Don't you be afraid. There might be some people upset outside, but I'll be with you." Sure enough, people shouted and shook their fists when we got out of the car, but I held my mother's hand and followed the marshals through the crowd up the steps into the school. The next morning was harder. My mother told me she couldn't go to school with me that day. She had to work. "Marshals will take care of you, Ruby Nell," Mama assured me. "Remember, if you do get afraid, you can pray to God anytime, anywhere. God will always hear you." And that was how I started praying on the way to school every day. The things people yelled at me didn't seem to touch me. Prayer was my protection. I imagine Ruby Bridges walking into school that day like David walking into the Elah Valley, small, vulnerable, walking out to confront Goliath. Absolutely sure of the rightness of the cause, absolutely sure that they were not alone in it. You see, the truth of this children's Bible story is that these things happen. 6-year-old girls confront centuries of racism and the laws of the state, walk through crowds of hateful adults with nothing but pure faith and the power of prayer to protect them. I love Leif Enger's luminous novel, Peace Like a River. It begins in a small town in Minnesota, the year 1962. Two teenage troublemakers attempt to kidnap the narrator's 9-year-old sister, Swede. After describing the events, the narrator offers these powerful words. A 9-year-old shouldn't be dragged from her house by someone who hates her, nor be forced to hear the language of the unloved. A 9-year-old shouldn't be told, we'll take you home now, but we'll be back. We're right outside your window. And now, because a story is told for all, an admonition to the mind sick. Be careful whom you choose to hate. The small and the vulnerable own a protection great enough, if you could but see it, to melt you into jelly. Beware those who reside beneath the shadow of the wings. This, I believe, is the very sturdy, if sometimes unseen, truth of this memorable story. God is always on the side of the underdog, the oppressed, the powerless, the persecuted. God is the protector of the weak. God can be counted on in the struggle against all that seeks to undo us. So if you want to discover the meaning of this ancient story, let Goliath be a symbol for all that is fierce, intimidating, and scary. Now look, be as specific as you can and name that giant that you must face. For James Baldwin taught us a half-century ago that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So face what must be changed and call it Goliath. Let it be the giant. Let Goliath be whatever threatens you, whatever makes you feel small and weak and helpless. Let Goliath be any of those giants that are waiting for you when you wake up in the morning, that won't let you rest easy at night. Let Goliath be whatever immobilizes you. Fear of an uncertain future, of failure, of risk, of intimacy, of loneliness, of lost relationships, of meaningful work, of aging, of vulnerability, of meaninglessness. Let Goliath be the fear of speaking up for what is right, lest you be labeled, pushed down, silenced, or shamed. Let Goliath be those very real giants looming above you. The diagnosis you didn't expect, the news you can't process, the demands that have become too heavy to carry, the never-ending responsibilities, the unrelenting challenges. Let Goliath be the powers and the principalities that oppose the way of God in this world, the systems that divide us and oppress, the ingrained structures, the ghosts of our past that impede on our present and block the path to a brighter future. Let them be Goliath. Let Goliath be the reality you were taught not to question, the circumstance you've been told cannot be changed. Let Goliath be the headlines that only tell of hatred, of violence, of terror, of destruction, of lives cut short and families in the grip of grief. Let Goliath be that final enemy, the power of death itself. Not just physical death, but the erosion of death, of hope, of faith. Let Goliath be the fear that lurks behind every other fear. And then open your hands and see what God has placed in them. Prayers silent and spoken. The surrounding presence of God on every side. 5 smooth stones. That's all you'll have as you enter the battle. So use them wisely. Hold them close. Hear the truth of David's story. You've been offered a power Goliath will never know. Amen.